I'm so excited about my guest today. One of the most striking things I discovered about this author is that he had immense affection from his fans, some of whom would find his books on Pirate Bay and then would reach out to him to support him, resulting in a PayPal link on his website labeled "For Pirates." He brought us the Burn Saga, blew all our minds with the masterpiece, New York Times bestselling work that is Wool, then moved on to write Sand. Wool has now been turned into an Apple TV show, which will be released May 5th of 2023. He shared his love for wayfinding with us in the form of several books on the subject and has sailed all over the world in his catamaran. Today, he joins me for this interview. Hugh Howey, it is an honor and a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So I mentioned Sand and I mentioned Wool. You've been writing for quite a while, and you've produced so many books. And I know it's important to you to get practice on writing. So I want to ask you a question specifically about writing to kind of get us going in that direction. I remember whenever I was reading Wool. And I was kind of deep in the book, and there's a scene where Jules has a conversation with someone over the phone. It's a stranger; she doesn't know who she's having a conversation with. And then later, in several like a long way forward in the story, Solo has that same conversation, and it's Jules. It's on the other side, I believe, is that's the way that it works. Or I might be getting the characters confused, but I remember this conversation happening on two sides of the silo, and I remember thinking, like, it blew my mind. So how do you approach the process of writing a book? Do you plan everything in advance, or do you just kind of let the story unfold as it goes?
A little of both. I think too much of a distinction is made between plotters and pantsers because people who outline a book are doing it by the seat of their pants. You're still tapping into that magical creative energy where you just ask yourself questions and somehow have the answers, and something new kind of blossoms in front of you. So even outlines have that same kind of creative meandering, and you're not sure where it's gonna lead. And when you're writing by the seat of your pants, I think you're writing to a lot of archetypes and tropes and things that guide you in one direction. And so even if I know the end of a story and I know the broad outline, all the little details kind of emerge um, haphazardly, and you some of the best stuff you find when you're writing are things you didn't plan.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, I like to daydream about my story well in advance, so I have a broad idea of what's going to happen, and especially the ending. If I know the climax I'm working towards, then I know how things should set up, what each character arc should be, things like that. I don't think you should just sit down at a blank page and not know what you're writing about, and start just a once upon a time kind of entry and not know who your characters are or have thought about your themes or any of that stuff. I think that's a very difficult way to write a story with lots of layers and meaning.
So do you have points at what points in your writing um, do you experience a tension between like what you intend maybe and what you find happening with the story?
Yeah, there's all the time. You know, you characters say things you don't expect them to say, and develop in a way you don't expect them. And minor characters might suddenly kind of jump off the page and appeal to you more and demand more attention.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think you need to lose a little control of the story at times and have it surprise you, because you want to sit down to write with the same enthusiasm that you sit down to read a great book. Like, you just
Hmm.
have to know what happens next. And even if you know, like, okay, they're going to go into this restaurant and a fight's going to break out, like how that happens, and who joins the fight, and the banter, all that stuff kind of emerges, and it's fun to watch that happen on the page.
Do you have any examples of like times when your writing has surprised you, like where things you didn't expect was going to happen in any of your stories?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about them without too big of spoilers, but there've been several times where I thought a character was going to survive to the end of a story, and I and the plot just kind of led them down a dead end. Like there was no way to make it feel authentic unless I gave them a send off,
Yeah.
and there've been times where I wrote a good part of the third part of Wool without a love interest for Juliet, and so
Hmm.
there's an entire character who became integral to the entire plot. Lucas, who wasn't in there in the first draft, and when you read it now, it's so seamless. You just can't imagine that story without him.
Right.
But that was one that, looking back, I just can't imagine having taken that a different direction.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're saying that actually that even what readers experience whenever they're kind of following the story and something they didn't expect to happen, and the same thing happens to you as a writer, is that you're like, oh wow, that takes it's truly the characters take on their own life and start telling their own story.
All the time, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, so the I think you're most well known for Wool. I think it's just kind of like a I think Wool kind of maybe made you a rather household name in fiction, and it's often whenever people I think your fans are probably most familiar with you as your Wool as a bestseller, but the early days, you were working to do this and kind of just getting every spare moment to write. So when Wool became a best selling author, what was that process like? I mean, I'm sorry, when Wool became a bestseller, what was that process like for you, and how did the success of Wool come about?
I mean, it came about with just a lot of luck. I happened to be publishing at a time that there were very few people self-publishing on Amazon's new KDP platform.
Hmm.
Uh, ebooks and e-readers were really proliferating, and so even publishers were really hesitant to even create ebooks of a lot of their. They're very short-sighted in that way.
Hmm.
They were trying to protect the relationship with booksellers. So, and Amazon was really eager to have content to showcase their devices and sell books in another way because they were already the biggest bookstore in the world at the time.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so so those of us who were self publishing like in 2009 had a lot of oxygen, all to ourselves, and um, so that timing was really lucky. I think the fact that it was a short story, it was 99 cents, it was very little time or monetary
yeah.
costs in giving it a try. And it had a shocking ending. Like it's one of those kind of mysteries that leaves you guessing. And however you think it's going to end, you're probably wrong at some point in the story.
Right.
And so I think people were reading it, finishing it, which is critical for the
Yeah.
success of anything. Um, and because you can't recommend something you don't finish, and yeah, just the reader reviews hit, and that's a huge part of the metrics and the algorithm on Amazon. So it's just a perfect storm,
Yeah.
and it happened without me expecting it. I was promoting my novels and thinking other things would have a better chance.
Yeah, that's actually a question I was wondering about because I read your thread about advice on adapting novels to the screen. I found it to be a wealth of information, and loved how you said your approach is to assume that like nothing will ever get made. So that's kind of like your approach when it comes to like Hollywood and like this is never going to become a movie. And how does that how does this mindset affect your writing process? Like, do you think that a good idea won't ever turn into a good book, or any good book that you write won't turn out into a massive success, or is that just for things that are out of your control in general?
Yeah, I think it's agonizing over things you can't control is a recipe for disillusionment and disappointment, and it goes beyond just not expecting a TV show or film to get made. I don't expect a book to sell.
Yeah.
If I write something, there's a really good chance it'll not find an audience. So that's not something I can control. I can't, force people to pay for it. I can't force people to take the time to read it. When I wrote
Yeah.
my first book, getting family and friends to even read a 300-page Word document, like
Right.
here it's free. Like, yeah, but I'm rather go walk the dog. I'd rather go to the beach. I'm not going to sit and
Right.
read your like some relative or friend who's written like, oh my god, I'm proud of like, oh my god, 300 pages of story, and they're like,
Yeah.
300 pages. Do not have time for that. So we and when I hear authors express frustration, it's all these things they can't control.
Mm.
They're trying to sell books. They're trying to get someone to review their book. They're trying to get someone to read it, and those are things you have to hope for. And there's things you can do to try to increase your chances. But having expectations for an outcome that involves someone else's um, time and energy is the wrong way to go about it. What we can control is like, do we write a story that we're super proud of?
Hmm.
Something that is, uh, it's in our voice. It has some beauty to it. It tells an engaging story. There's great characters. Like these are all things we can control.
Hmm.
Do we package it well? Do we write a good book description? Do we find good cover art or come up with a way of making our own cover art or whatever we can put into it? That's all us. And
Right.
then what happens after that? Like again, it's good to have hopes, but I don't think it's good to get angry at the world because the things that happen to your career and your success don't happen for you.
Mm.
And I, I know it's like, it sounds really trite to hear from someone who's had success, but this has been my attitude from the very beginning. If you go back
Right.
and look at my very early forum posts and blog posts about this, Um, all I cared about was like, here's a great story. Here's how I can make it available to as many people as possible. Love for you to give it a shot, you know.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
and then now I'm going to go work on the other story, the next story.
Well, you describe, yeah, I think you in your thread, I think you described it as the idea that quote nothing will ever get made, and just being happy. I mean, you said I was happy when I think you said something like when a relative read the book and enjoyed it. Like and I
Yeah,
love like you're really like tapping into things that you can control. I can write a story with good characters. I can write a story that is engaging and enjoyable to read. I can write a story in which the world building is solid, and that like there is an environment that I'm painting the picture of, and people can imagine what that silo is like, or imagine a suit that vibrates and makes it where you can dive in sand. And so it's really that's really cool to do that, because then you can go, regardless of the success level of this work, I'm happy with the final product. And if this doesn't turn into a best-selling work, or this doesn't turn into a movie in your case. But speaking of movies, your work has been adapted now for film and television. How involved were you in the adaptation process?
Uh, so I've got two TV shows that have been filmed. We've been optioned in for film and other stuff, but these two coming out this year, the only things that have really been shot. Um, I was in the writers' room for both, which was a lot of fun. Got to kind of help lay out the arc of the story and plot like individual episodes. But we've got great showrunners who that's their job is to hire the writers who they and the writers will go out and write each individual episode. Um, but I'm lucky to get to executive produce on these, which gets me a say in the edits and the scripts as they come out, and get to visit set and have some opinion on how things are done. And so
Hmm.
far, I've worked with like two really good studios and teams that seem to value my input and are super excited to have me involved, and um, uh, seem to really enjoy the world that they get to dabble in. But that's a some something that I don't want to do is like just make a one-to-one
Gotcha.
adaptation. I think each medium needs to tell a story in its own way, and the teams that come in and work on these need to feel like their creative input is appreciated. It needs to become their world as well, in order for them to, you know, get up every single day. And the filming for the first season of Silo took like 8 months, and that's a lot of work for a lot of people, and they need
Yeah.
to bring their creative energy into it.
Wow, that's really amazing. That's a really incredible perspective, rather than being like, so I guess for that, then you had to release a certain degree of control, where you say,
Oh,
look, yeah,
you have to, if
yeah,
you're going in to have something adapted and you want to have complete control. um, it's possible, but you have to build up a really solid reputation first. Like Stephen King has had a lot of things done, had no control over earlier projects, and has gotten to where he can exert more influence later. Same with Harlan Coben, who would give the rights to a French film would get made, and he'd have almost no input on it. And now he's worked up to where he can show run and be in charge of hiring and um, all the writing duties, and make it just what he wants. But even then, you try to create a perfect adaptation. Like a good example is the Watchmen film that came out a while
hmm
back.
yeah,
um, there was almost like framing it in the way the individual panels in the comic were framed, and just
hmm
giving so much homage to it that they just made a moving version of it. And it's
right,
beautiful, and it's the story that we're familiar with, but not many people walked out of that with the same feeling they had when they read the
right,
graphic novel for the first time. And then the Watchmen TV show came out, which had nothing to do with what's in the comic book itself, but paid, like, I think, an even better homage to the source material, updating it, refreshing it, but building on it, not replacing it, keeping it intact. And that made one of the best seasons of TV, um, I've ever seen. So I I think people love defending the novel and complaining about differences, but to me, the
yeah.
differences are like exciting and fun.
Are you anticipating there's going to be a lot of emails in your inbox whenever the TV show comes out about like what they did right or didn't do right, or yeah, how do you think fans are
Yeah,
going to
people have
respond?
opinions.
Yeah.
I've started hearing just in the last like 3 or 4 days. I've been getting the first like private messages about the adaptation, because critics can see all 10 episodes now. Um, so and everything's been positive so far. Like more than
Awesome.
positive. People have been, yeah, really, like really happy with how it came out. Um, yeah, I'm used to all levels of critique. I've been publishing for over a decade, so I've got plenty of 1-star reviews out there, and then I've got other people that have like stuff from my books tattooed on their skin. So uh,
That's awesome.
I'm used to that broad range. I try to stay supportive and enthusiastic of people who are having a positive experience,
That's
and
so cool.
only slightly apologetic to people who are disappointed.
Uh, yeah. So now with your stories, like one of the things I really love about both Wool and Sand, which are the two books I've spent the most time with, is the post-apocalyptic. Like I want to say post-apocalyptic. I don't know if that's even the right term, but like but in Sand, it's with Wool, you get into the story and you hear I think it was from Solo's perspective, where he's reading a book and it's talking about elephants or something like that, and it's like that's crazy that that would ever exist because their whole existence has always been in this silo. um, what is it that made that stood out to you about this? Why did you choose to write in the post what we know world? Is it because of the idea that we don't have preconceived ideas about the world, or did you just enjoy that kind of landscape?
I think the reason post-apocalyptic fiction has gotten popular is um, if you look at why we tell stories, it's one of the first things that we started doing. Like there's a great book out there called The Storytelling Animal about the evolutionary psychology of storytelling and the evolutionary history of it. Um, in general, storytelling is a survival mechanism, not just for sharing information and knowledge with each other, but uh, warning each other of dangers. If you look at the stories that the first stories we hear are, um,
Mm.
don't go into the woods. It's
Yeah.
bad things can happen there. Ghost stories um, and gossip and danger, and uh, it's us just trying to puzzle out our place in the universe. And as we started mapping more and more of the planet, there were fewer of those like unknown, dangerous parts of the world to talk about.
Mm.
So the dark wood stories when we started sailing became the stranded on a deserted island stories, and when
Wow.
we started sailing other continents, they became frontier stories. When we started moving west, they became the western frontier stories. And it's always like what's happening where law breaks down, you lose your connection to other people, you don't have access to all your tools, you're kind of living in this um, embattled kind of survival state. Once we mapped the earth, now people start telling stranded on Mars stories, lost in space stories,
Yeah.
lost in time. um, how can we get people out of their comfort zone, away from their tribe, away from civilization? And post-apocalyptic stories, I think we get too focused on the apocalypse part of it. That's not the
Yeah.
point at all. The disaster films, it's the comet or the Godzilla or whatever is creating the disaster. That's not the point. The point is to tear away what makes us feel safe, and then write stories about how we survive in that state.
Hmm.
And when you see it through that lens, almost all the stories that we read come from that. Like even Disney films, a parent dies, and
Mm.
how do you survive now that you've lost your connection to your tribe
Yeah.
and you've been cast out? Okay, you're a lion cub who's like in the jungle now instead of
Yeah.
in the plains. Like so,
Yeah.
um, it's all the same story really.
Yeah. It
And
is.
even
Wow.
even a lot of literary novels are like you're going through a divorce. It might not seem sci-fi or exciting, but it's about having your world destroyed.
Yeah.
And what do you do in that situation? And
Yeah.
even in a romance novel, a love story, people falling in love is a type of destruction. We
Mm.
have a comfort in our certain way of doing things, and now here's a person whose soul has a huge power and impact on me. And how do I survive this flood of
It's
emotions that
it's
comes
a
with that?
it's losing losing agency and control of yourself. Even if it's a positive thing, you're still losing the world. Like the quote world that you inhabited before that is now completely changed.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So I was going to ask about like your writing dealing with like issues of morality and ethics, and I think about um, in Wool specifically. And again, I need to be careful of spoilers here because I don't want to spoil anything. But there's it's so full of the push and pull of human um, of human behavior and when you're writing in those, do you intend to have any kind of like how do you approach the theme without having maybe a commentary, or is your intention just to be true? Like what I guess the question is, how do you approach those themes, and is there anything you hope your readers will take away from them?
Yeah. For each major work I work on, there's usually a theme that I want to explore, and it could be it's usually drawn from the headline, something I'm going through or some experience in my life. 9/11 was really impactful, so
Mm-hmm.
that's so, a bit of trauma that I've tried to work through. Um, have the PTSD from that became a theme for Beacon 23.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you recover from trauma? And that one's a pretty easy one to explore, and it's personal like that.
Mm-hmm.
But watching the war in Syria break out, inspired the themes of Sand, which were like the challenges of leaving a home, even if it's dangerous of being demolished. It's still your home, and a lot of people choose to stay there no matter what. And I find something courageous both in that, and also something very courageous in just grabbing a few belongings and walking to freedom, because
Mhm.
nothing feels safe like home. Just we make it sound like, oh yeah, they just like went to Europe and went to France. Like, can you imagine how terrifying that would be to like? We make it sound like everyone just wants to come to the United States.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you're living in South America somewhere, like the food, the language, the smells, the atmosphere, everything is like home. And the idea that everyone just wants to walk here and live in you know some American city and have to learn the language, and um, it, very few people have the courage to do that. And I think the people who do it are marvels. And just trying to wrap my head around that led
Wow.
to
That's
an
really
entire
amazing.
book series.
Oh, that's amazing. So I would not have thought that. I'm so glad to see that. Now I want to go back to read Sand again, um, just to have that to just have that idea. So since we love books so much, and you're so good at you understand the craft so well and so broadly. What are some book recommendations you might have? Like you mentioned earlier, your the book about um, writing the what was the book you mentioned earlier about like the evolution
This,
of work,
yeah, the storytelling animal.
the storytelling animal. Are there other books that you feel are like had a big impact on you as a writer? And do you want to would you share a few of those with us?
Yeah, I think for writing craft, uh, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves is a great, hilarious book on grammar that I picked up some things from that I think would be one of the first books I would hand any young aspiring writer, just to get some of the, you kind of want to get your form correct before you start breaking off into theme and plot and character and all that other stuff. Just make sure you have the basics down. It's like learning to play basketball. One of the first things you learn is just how to dribble, how to do a chest pass. You're not
Hmm.
trying to nail threes, but you sit on the free throw line and work on your form and your where your elbow is. Those things seem boring, but it's an important foundation. And a lot of us don't get really good writing instruction even in school. Like I read Eat, Shoots, and Leaves after college, and wish I'd read it
Mm.
earlier because I learned a lot from it. There's a lot of classics out there. Um, Bird by Bird and On Writing by Stephen King. Like, um,
Yeah.
if you read like any top 10 list of writing advice books, I would read them all if you want this to be a passionate hobby
Yeah.
of yours. But for me, the important books are finding books that really sing to you, that just have incredible prose, that when you read them, you feel like you become a better writer. And
Mm.
everyone's taste is going to be different there. But I think the prerequisite to being a writer is being a reader. And you should try to, read 30 to 50 books a year as you're starting out if you can. Spend all your spare time reading.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think Stephen King had the same thing about reading, just reading being a big part of writing. Um, so, speaking of writing, what advice would you give? Like, I mean, if you could sum it down, I know, I mean, you have you have such a prolific career, but when you think of aspiring writers coming up, you just mentioned some great advice, which is to read a lot. But is there any mindset advice that you would give um, writers on their journey?
Yeah, if you Google like writing insights and my name, you'll get a 4-part series I wrote where I just tried to distill anything I think of that could help writers like into blog posts, so people could just have the information all in one place for
Hmm.
free. Um, and so I go into much more detail there. But I think the main thing is to take the pressure off yourself as you're writing. Write your rough drafts loosely. Don't worry about mistakes.
Yeah.
Uh, give yourself some freedom, knowing that you're going to come back and revise it and make it stronger later. Um, don't worry about your audience too much when you're writing those rough drafts. Don't feel someone over your shoulder kind of judging what you're writing. That's usually your
Yeah.
own inner critic that can get in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And um, write what you would want to read. Write for your own enjoyment and entertainment, and not what you think the market needs or what you think is going to be thrilling to someone else. Like write the
Yeah.
best book that you can and what you feel like it's missing from the bookshelf.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. And finally, what are you currently working on, and what can readers expect from you in the future?
Right now, I'm working on the third and final book in the Sand series. So get the second book came out last year, and um, we just did a TV deal that we'll announce pretty soon for that. It will never get made, but it's still fun to get another thing optioned.
It'll never get
Um,
made.
so it'll never get made. So yeah, I'll get that third book out, and then have a few other things that'll come out this year, children's picture books and all kinds of other stuff.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, Hugh, you've been so gracious with your time, and I so appreciate this. I will link to and wherever this video is, whether it be on our website or it be on YouTube or wherever, you can find the links that to all of the stuff that Hugh mentioned here. Thank you so much for your time, and you keep on keeping on, man. We love what you're doing. Thanks.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Thanks.